The Guardians of the Fire. The Resurrection. Prologue. A clacking sounded through the entire cave as the young man struck the flintstones against each other to ignite the fire bowl standing in front of him. There's no point in that, nobody's been here for ages. The thing never burns. A shrill woman's voice rang out in the darkness. At that moment, a spark flew on the tinder that the man had previously placed in the bowl. A short glow was to be recognized, which went out however just as fast again, as it came. Let's just use our fire magic. Why do we control her? The woman continued. The man rose and threw the flintstones on the ground before his deep, humming voice sounded, "It really doesn't make sense. Then I guess we'll have to find our way in the dark. And you know exactly why we don't use our magic. So come on." He turned away and walked slowly forward. Fortunately, he had a very good memory, which made it easy for him to remember the layout of the cave system. Just because a newcomer who had walked away said that we shouldn't use magic doesn't mean that we have to listen to him, does it? She hated the darkness and couldn't cope with it either. She constantly stumbled over stones protruding from the ground or hit walls or columns with her shoulders and head. But "don't make such a noise" was the only thing that got her to listen to her protest and only made her more angry. But that didn't interest the man walking safely through the cave. He focused only on the floor plan in his head and where he stepped. A short time and a few cave sections later the man stopped in front of a 5-meter-high wall. A whole piece behind him approached his companion, stumbling and cursing quietly. "Are we finally here?" Her voice didn't sound any less annoyed than it did at the beginning of her maze run. "Yes, we are. You know what to do." His voice muttered, which sounded threatening through the reverberation of the cave. Yeah, I know." She went to the right side of the wall and the man went to the left. After some keying, they found small openings no larger than 2 fingers and placed their thumbs on each of them. "On 3. Said the woman, and her voice sounded completely different than it did a few moments ago. The annoyance had completely disappeared and was replaced by anticipation and tension. 1, 2-sided 3. After both pressed in their switch at the same time, a loud noise was heard from the other side of the wall. Like heavy stones rubbing against each other. The floor began to vibrate, dust and small pieces of rock fell from the ceiling and the wall began to sink slowly. The joy in both rose with every piece that the wall lowered, even if at least the man didn't let it show. Unlike his partner, who made squeaky noises. "We're almost there," she rejoiced. But at that moment the wall stopped halfway up. "What are you doing? Shouldn't this thing go all the way down?" The annoyance in her voice returned abruptly. The man smiled at the rapid change of mood. After all, he was used to it from the 8 years she had been in the order. "Take it easy. I'm sure it'll be the same as the fire bowl. It's just been too long since it worked properly. We're so close. Should we press the mechanism together again, maybe it will continue," she asked almost desperately. "That wouldn't make any sense. Come here. Come here. I'll lift you up." He leaned forward slightly and folded his hands into each other to provide a secure stand for them. His hands, like his entire physique, were huge compared to his slim companion's. She stepped on his hands with one foot and held onto his broad shoulders to keep the balance better. With one jerk he rose and tore his arms up. The woman's screeching sounded through the entire cave system. "Not so fast!" she shouted, but then she flew through the air. The tremendous thrust not only pushed them onto the wall, but across it. Fortunately, she was very well trained in the unarmed martial arts to land on her feet without any problems and to roll safely. As she rose up again, she heard a dull bang made by the heavy body of the man behind her jumping from the wall. For someone his size, it was no problem to overcome such a hurdle. "Did you have to throw me so high? I could have hurt myself," she shouted at him and underlined her anger about it with a blow to his chest, which didn't bother him much. "I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I misjudged your weight. I thought you were heavier," he mentioned casually and set himself in motion without paying any further attention to her. But that only fueled her anger even more. "Are you saying I'm too fat? Or what are you trying to tell me?" A sigh escaped the man. He got tired of her constant moaning. "No, that's not what it means. You look great, and now calm down and concentrate on our task." They walked along the long corridor, which had nothing in common with the cave system before, not even the darkness. The corridor was level, with brick walls. Every 10 meters there were holes in the ceiling, into which the light of the full moon fell and visibly illuminated the passage. "It's got to be that way. How are we doing in time?" The man, wrapped in a now visible dark gray coat with hood, pointed with his finger to the passage further ahead. When asked, the woman took a child's fist large stone out of her pocket and held it into the moonlight. "According to the statements of the new man, we still seem to have time. But I can't imagine that this really works. How can an ordinary stone like that shine in the moonlight? Why hasn't anyone ever heard of it or seen anything like it before?" The man shook his head. He explained to us that this is no ordinary stone and that this is no ordinary moonlight. It is transformed by a magical barrier in the ceiling holes or something like that. I didn't exactly get that either. But if he's really right about what he said, it's definitely worth the effort, he said almost admonishingly. "If you say so. I'm only with you anyway because the head of the order asked me to take care of you." The man broke out laughing and took an evil look for it, which silenced his laughter. "I know for a fact that you are just as excited as anybody else in the order to see if what the new one said is really true. And if anybody's got to watch who, it's more like I'm watching you." Without answering anything, she walked past him as if she hadn't heard what he said. A few ceiling openings further, she noticed how the stone in her hand easily began to glow as she walked through the moonlight. "Zemir. Look. The stone actually begins to glow when I hold it into the light. The new guy seems right." Full of admiration for the shimmering white stone, she stopped in the moonlight to take a closer look at it. "What are you standing there for? We're running out of time, we have to hurry." Zemir shouted over her shoulder, already accelerating his step. Only at that moment did she realize what it meant that he began to glow. "You really had to hurry. You're still rooted to the ground, Shula." It was at that moment that she set herself in motion. First, step by step, which became faster and faster until she finally ran to shorten the distance between herself and Zemir. But she could not keep up with his amazingly fast steps for his size. She only reached him when he had stopped in front of an altar. "So this is it, the resting place of the phoenix," Shula said in awe. "You mean gravesite," corrected the humming voice. Without saying anything else, Shula stood in a small circle irradiated by moonlight and held the stone, which now shone much brighter than before, on the flat hand, clearly visible to Zemir. He stood directly in front of the altar and laid both hands on the rectangular button. "Remember, you have to wait until he lights red," Shula reminded him of the new man's words. As if he needed a memory. The white shone brighter and brighter, so that almost the entire room appeared as bright as day. Zemir had to force himself not to look away so he wouldn't miss the moment. When it became almost unbearable, there was a small, barely perceptible spark inside the stone and the previously dazzling white turned into a pleasantly warm red. Rather out of surprise, Zemir pushed the stone slab into the altar, setting a new mechanism in motion. A rumble seemed to come from all directions. Hectically, the two looked around where something was happening. That was the only thing the new guy couldn't tell them. He only said that the phoenix would resurrect from his prison at the right moment after pressing the button. The rumbling stopped. Suddenly the stone tablet broke and a small red glow rose out into the air and floated over the altar. It almost seemed like a firefly, which it certainly wasn't. It swayed back and forth in the air, without wanting to take a particular direction, until it suddenly flew straight towards the now fiery red glowing stone in Shula's hand. When they touched, time seemed to stand still for a moment. After this short moment the stone dissolved into a gigantic fire wave. Shula had no way of escaping from her and was completely consumed by her. Zemir, on the other hand, was fortunate that the blast wave that propelled him hurled him behind the altar before the flames reached him. He lay on his back with his face eaten away by pain, trying to understand what had just happened. He tried to stand up and look around when he noticed. The altar had not been able to completely protect him from harm. His right arm with shoulder and almost his entire face had been caught and burned by the fire wave. Now that the shock had disappeared and he had grasped the full extent of the pain, he screamed out loud, even if he tried to pull himself together. With great effort he leaned his left arm on the ground to see what had happened to Shula. The shock wave had broken large pieces out of the ceiling, so that the room was now completely wrapped in cold moonlight. That's how he could see it clearly. Where Shula had just stood, there was now only a small pile of ash. He heard a voice from the hallway they had taken. "What?" he shouted as he saw the man in the black cape just entering the room. Even though his face was completely covered by the low-hanging hood, Zemir knew exactly who it was. "What are you doing here? Did you know that was gonna happen?" In the otherwise quiet, grumpy voice anger rose. "No, I didn't know for sure, I had only heard rumors that it should be so. Now all we have to do is wait until the time is right, my friend." Zemir could well imagine the gloating grin under the hood. "We're not friends, you dog. You just sacrificed Shula's life for your goals," he yelled at him. "You're gonna pay for this." A laugh sounded out of the hood before he moved towards Zemir. "Indeed, you might be right that I'm going to pay for that. But until then, we still have some time. Look up, he instructed Zemir, who at first didn't understand what it all meant. Then he noticed that the white light of the moon had turned red. Jerkily, he looked through the large hole in the ceiling and saw a meteor wrapped in fire, moving through the sky. A new era is dawning was the last thing Zemir heard when his body surrendered to the pain and he lost consciousness.